So I'm sure we have some guitar players out in the crowd. Got a few musicians, guitar players. Some of you might have heard of MIDI guitar synthesizers. Some of you may not have any idea what I'm talking about. But today I just kind of want to chronicle my journey, my musical journey, and my journey here at SCC, and how I'm merging guitar, live sound, audio recording, and electronic music, which are kind of the tracks in the audio production technology here at SCC. So just to give you a bit of a background, my musical background, some of the bands I've been in, I have, like Lisa said, I've toured nationally with Clandestine. They're here from Arizona. Some of you may have heard of them. I've done the blues rock trio thing, Clapton, Beck, Page, Hendrix thing, all around town. That was fun. Funk, R&B, Sons of Soul band. The last 4 or 5 years, I've primarily been playing in jazz, mostly in my jazz band, Mello. So that's been kind of my playing guitar experience. I'm also do quite a bit of studio recording. So I do that at home and in other studios as well. So that's a shot of one of my funner recording sessions. So before I get into the technical aspect of MIDI guitar, I'd kind of like to just bring up some of the early pioneers and some of the people that were doing it from the very beginning, really when this technology was new. We're talking early 80s. So Jimmy Page is a big fan of mine. I'm a big fan of his. Someday he'll be a big fan of mine. And Led Zeppelin, I know everyone's heard of Led Zeppelin. After Led Zeppelin kind of fell apart, Jimmy Page jumped into the MIDI guitar technology. He actually put out an album that featured a soundtrack for a film, Death Wish 3, that primarily featured guitar synth. Pat Metheny, some of you may have heard, he's been playing guitar synth from the very beginning, since the early 80s. 17 Grammy award-winning musician, jazz fusion. And then Steve Stevens is kind of from the pop rock era of MTV era, Billy Idol. He was a guitar player for Billy Idol. He was one of the earliest guitar players that toured with the early guitar synth setups. And Alan Holdsworth is one of my big influences. He's a virtuoso jazz fusion guitarist that has delved deeply into guitar synthesis. So that's been a big inspiration. And just kind of go through my studies here at SCC. I've really enjoyed returning to school. I never went to college when I was younger, really, so at some point in the future, I'd like to teach in my areas of expertise, so that's why I'm back getting my degree and going through the program. So some of the instructors that of note for me would be Dr. Essler, live sound. He's an awesome teacher. And then Elaine Walker, the electronic music teacher here at SCC, and computer synthesis. She's a microtonalist and an inventor as well. One other thing about the faculty here in the music department that I really like is that they're not just teachers, but they're real-world musicians, and a lot of them create other things outside of even just music, inventors. Craig Schumacher owns a recording studio you may have heard of in Tucson called Wave Lab, and he's been doing that for about 20 years. He's a highly sought-out engineer, recording producer. Ron Marschall is the director of the recording program here at SCC, and he's also a drummer in a kind of a 90s indie rock band. He still tours over the summers, does shows. So I find that inspiring, and I know the other students find that inspiring, and they kind of gravitate to instructors who are not only teaching, but they're still active in the performance end of it. Here's a shot of the recording studio at SCC. And then here's the electronic music class. So I've had guitar synthesizers, and I'll kind of go over what that is for probably about 4 or 5 years, but it was in my electronic music class that I was really able to bring my guitar synth into class and start plugging that into the computer and accessing different things that way. One of my projects for electronic music class was this remote laptop system with a small converter that I was able to do guitar synthesis at like gigs. So I'm also the lab monitor in the music department over there. So if you're ever around in the mornings and by 1:38, I'm usually in there. Now, as lab monitor, I was able to take some old equipment that was just kind of laying around and wasn't being used and put together this little MIDI performance station. So now students not only have their individual workstations, but they can perform as combos and groups. So with MIDI instruments, there's an electronic drum set, there's keyboards, and then there's also a theremin and a guitar synth as well. So we're trying to get everybody to participate more. As part of my degree for audio production technology, I had to intern at a studio, and my internship was at Full Well Studios in Phoenix. An old friend of mine actually owns that studio. So I did complete that this semester. That was fun, and actually I ended up getting some recording sessions out of that whole gig. So a little bit of the technical side, how do guitar synthesizers work? And what is MIDI? You know, Lisa kind of alluded to it a little bit. MIDI is just simply the information protocol. It's the system that electronic instruments talk to each other. It has no audio in any of the data. It's strictly performance data information. So as you hit a keyboard, it's the note you pick, it's how hard you hit it, how fast you hit it. It's all the physical parameters of the performance, everything other than the sound. That information is then transmitted to the synthesizers through MIDI cables, and that's the synthesizer is the sound creator. It's basically a computer or chips, and it can be hardware and software now too. Now, when guitar synths first came out, everything was hardware, but now in the computer, we have all virtual instruments, and that's really where I'm exploring. So I'll give you just a quick rundown of the evolution of guitar synthesizers. Like I said, they start off hardware. Now, you needed to use that guitar with that actual guitar synth box. That was one of the first Roland guitar synths Pat Metheny used for many years. It's kind of archaic by today's standards, but it was the first and it was widely used. Next, and then this evolution here is, I'm gonna primarily focus on Roland guitar synths. There are many others, but Roland was probably the most popular. Another one here, the second generation, you can see how big that controller box is compared to the guitar. It was pretty big and cumbersome, and it wasn't very programmable. Here's the evolution of Roland GR guitar synths. So that's about 25 years worth of guitar synths represented there. Up until 2011, we came out with the GR-55, which is, the neat thing about this new version of synth is you don't need a proprietary guitar. You can attach that GK3 pickup to any existing guitar without permanently altering it. Well, I shouldn't say any, but a good majority of guitars, even acoustics. So that allows any guitar player to have access to synth sounds. So if we take a quick look at that, that GR-55 actually has 2 synth engines in it. So it's like having 2 synthesizers. As well as synthesizer, there's modeling, so you can emulate other sounds as well. So the way the sound gets from the guitar through that pickup into the synthesizer, it's fairly straightforward, but each string has a pickup, and that's what I've got the arrows there for, to represent that. And what that allows me to do is to have each string have its own separate track. Now, I can use the sounds in my guitar synth, and those are great sounds, but what I'm really interested in and kind of concentrating on in my electronic music classes is how I get to access sounds electronically in the computer, and we use Pro Tools for that. Pro Tools is the software. It's pretty much the industry standard. The thing with Pro Tools, it's basically just an audio recorder and an audio editor, but it gives you control over everything. Now, it's not just audio, because it also lets you emulate certain instruments that you wouldn't normally be able to play. Here's a data track from one of those pickups into a MIDI track in Pro Tools. So virtual subtractive synths. So these are basically software emulations of real-world analog synthesizers that you would have to pay thousands of dollars for, or perhaps couldn't even find anymore. I have access to all of these sounds in Pro Tools. And then there's a lot of sounds that come with Pro Tools. There's a lot of third-party things that are available. So not only the synthesizer sounds, but emulations of amplifiers, stomp boxes. So all the stuff that I grew up wishing I had when I was a kid, I have in the computer now, which is an amazing thing for me. It's not just guitar and synths, though, too. If you can see up there, drums, drum sets, anything you can possibly think of, there's some sort of emulator in the recording world now, digitally. More synthesizers, FM8. These are all screenshots, mostly from Pro Tools, and Pro Tools is what we're using, or what SCC has in the Midi Lab. So students are using this software every day now. That's what they're learning on. There's also budget digital audio workstations that generally come with hardware when you buy it. These have come a long way. They're kind of not quite as in-depth as Pro Tools, but they get the job done, and they're much more affordable. Also, software editor for my synthesizer. So I have computer control over my hardware synthesizer. I can create patches, back them up, save them in ways that I wouldn't just be able to do right on the unit themselves. Guitar Pro software takes the MIDI information and spits out audio or musical notation scores, which is what Sibelius does. Sibelius is another program that SCC has installed on the computers. So there's actually quite a bit of things over there, 138, on those iMacs that are current and applicable to what's being done today in the field. So now I've been talking about this stuff. I'm going to give you an idea of what some of these things sound like. So this is a harp that I made, and I've got it triggering synths in Pro Tools. Okay, so that's a little off the beaten path there. So it's cool to be able to do things in the studio and in the lab, but at the end of the day, for me, I need to be able to do this stuff at a gig. So that's a whole different story, and that's kind of where the live sound reinforcement knowledge comes in. This is a clip from one of my jazz trios, and I'm playing a Dizzy Gillespie horn part on guitar. So if you're not used to seeing that, it kind of takes you back a little bit. And so many times at a gig, people will be looking at the stage and they're, well, where'd the horn player go? I'll be like, well, you're looking at him. So it's a lot of fun at gigs. Here's Craig Schumacher again. We kind of resurrected an old Yamaha guitar synth that was laying around and being unused. We got it working, or I got it working. And here's, for the first time, Craig firing it up. Craig's a great guy. Okay, so in my little MIDI station I assembled there in the lab, I kind of compiled some demonstration videos. So here's just some different sounds. I'm playing the school's Yamaha guitar synth, and I'm triggering sounds in a Kurzweil keyboard. Sound there. Thank you. So I should also say that I'm using a little looper pedal, so I'm able to lay down like a bass line and then have that repeat and play over the top of it. So with that technique, I created these bass and piano clips. So that's enough to get a lot of keyboard players upset. And probably, a big part of this for me really is that, the more sounds I have, sounds for me as a musician are like colors for an artist. So the more sounds I have, the more different kinds of emotions I can convey. So I try to get many different things in my palette that I can. Here's a xylophone sound. The clips with Justin are from my home studio, and then Justin's also a music guitar performance major here. String section back at the Midi Lab here. Love that sound on the Kurtz wheel. So another emulation of an old guitar synth. This is what the earliest guitar synths kind of sounded like. So, trumpet. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much.